Our family hadn't been broken because another child existed. Our family had been broken because of decades of dishonesty, and despite all that, the people who had every reason to resent each other were choosing kindness instead. That was the beginning of a new chapter none of us ever expected. A few months passed, and for the first time since everything came crashing down, life slowly began to settle into something that resembled a routine, not a normal routine. I don't think our family would ever go back to what we'd once considered normal, but the constant panic had faded. The late-night phone calls became less frequent. Hospital visits became follow-up appointments instead of emergencies, and every time my brother sent us a picture of my nephew, he looked a little stronger than the last one. The difference was impossible to ignore. His cheeks had started to fill out again, the dark circles under his eyes were fading, and most importantly, he was smiling in almost every picture. Those little updates became the highlight of my week. One Saturday morning, our family gathered at Ryan's house for a barbecue. It wasn't planned as some emotional reunion. It was simply the first time everyone felt ready to spend a day together. Mom came, Grandma came, Ryan and Noah were there, and for the first time, so were my older brother, his wife, and my nephew. Watching my nephew run around the backyard with my younger cousins made me emotional. A few months earlier, we'd been praying he'd survive. Now he was arguing over whose turn it was to throw a football. It was the kind of ordinary moment people usually take for granted. None of us did. At one point, my nephew ran over to my mom. She was sitting on the patio, sipping iced tea and watching everyone laugh. "Aunt Emily said you make the best chocolate chip cookies." Mom smiled. "Did she now?" He nodded very seriously. I was wondering, he hesitated for a second, if that's true. Everyone nearby burst into laughter. Mom laughed harder than I'd heard her laugh in months. "I guess you'll have to be the judge." She stood up and disappeared into the kitchen. An hour later, she came back carrying a tray of warm cookies. My nephew took one bite, his eyes got wide. "Okay," he nodded confidently. Aunt Emily wasn't lying. The whole backyard erupted in laughter again. It was such a small moment, but seeing my mom laugh without forcing it, that meant more to me than I can explain. As the afternoon went on, I found myself standing beside Ryan near the grill. He looked around the yard before speaking. "Can I tell you something? Always, I never thought we'd get here." "What do you mean?" He looked toward our brother. "A few months ago, if someone had told me we'd be standing in the same backyard laughing together, I would have called them crazy." I nodded. "So would have I," Ryan smiled. "You know what's strange? What? I don't think of him as Dad's secret anymore." I looked over at our brother. He was helping my nephew catch a football while Noah cheered them on. "What do you think of him as?" Ryan didn't even hesitate. "My brother," I smiled, because I felt exactly the same way. Of course, not everything was getting better. Dad had become almost completely isolated. Very few relatives spoke to him anymore. Ryan hadn't answered any of his calls in weeks. Noah only communicated with him through short text messages. Mom refused all contact except through their attorneys. As for me, I still hadn't figured out where I stood. Part of me missed the father I'd grown up believing I had. The other part couldn't forget what he'd done. One evening, he called while I was driving home from work. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded tired. "I was wondering if we could have dinner sometime." I was quiet for a moment. "Why? I just miss you." I believed him, I truly did, but missing someone doesn't erase what happened. "I miss the dad I thought I had." The words slipped out before I could stop them. There was a long silence. Finally, he spoke. "I know I don't expect forgiveness. I just wish I could go back and change everything." I sighed. "So do we." We ended the call a few minutes later. Neither of us had yelled. Neither of us had argued. There simply wasn't anything left to say. Some mistakes can't be undone, no matter how much you regret them. A few weeks later, my brother invited us to attend my nephew's annual checkup, not because we needed to be there, but because he wanted us to celebrate if the news was good. We all met at the children's hospital that morning. The waiting room felt strangely familiar, only this time, instead of fear, there was cautious optimism. After what felt like forever, the doctor finally walked into the room with a smile. "The transplant continues to be successful. We're very happy with his progress." My brother covered his face with both hands. His wife immediately started crying. Ryan hugged me. Noah let out a laugh that sounded more like relief than amusement, and my nephew, he looked up at the doctor and asked the most innocent question imaginable. "So, can I play baseball now?" The doctor laughed. "Not today, but very soon." My nephew threw both fists into the air. "Yes," everyone in the room laughed. As I watched him celebrate something as simple as being allowed to play baseball again, I realized something. Our family would never be the same. Some relationships had been destroyed forever. Others had been created under the most heartbreaking circumstances imaginable, but somehow, out of all the pain, lies, and betrayal, we had found something worth holding onto. A brother we'd never knew, a nephew we almost lost, and a reminder that sometimes the people who become your family aren't the ones who break your heart. They're the ones who choose to stand beside you after it's already broken. Nearly a year had passed since the day a private investigator knocked on the door of our lives and uncovered a secret that had been buried for more than 3 decades. Sometimes it still felt unreal. I'd wake up, make my coffee, start getting ready for work, and then I'd see a message from my brother in our family group chat, a picture of my nephew showing off another missing tooth. A video of him riding his bike, a short clip of him swinging a baseball bat in the backyard. Every single one of those moments reminded me how close we had come to never seeing any of it. Our family group chat had become surprisingly active. Ryan usually shared terrible jokes, Noah mostly sent sports highlights, my sister-in-law posted pictures of family outings, and my brother. He loved sharing updates about my nephew. One Friday evening my phone buzzed. It was a video. My nephew was standing in a little league uniform that looked slightly too big for him. He adjusted his cap, looked straight into the camera, and shouted, "Dad, Aunt Emily, Uncle Ryan, Uncle Noah, watch this." A second later, he hit the baseball cleanly into the outfield. You could hear everyone cheering behind the camera. I watched that 20-second video at least 10 times, not because he hit an amazing ball, but because months earlier, doctors weren't sure he'd even be healthy enough to hold a bat again. Life slowly moved forward. Mom finalized the divorce. The paperwork took months, but eventually it was over. 34 years of marriage officially came to an end with a few signatures. The day everything became final, I expected my mom to fall apart. Instead, she surprised me. I stopped by her apartment after work carrying takeout from her favorite Italian restaurant. She opened the door wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and an apron covered in flour. "Baking?" I asked. She smiled. "I'm trying." The apartment felt different now. The empty walls had been covered with family pictures. There were plants on the balcony. A bookshelf filled one corner of the living room. It finally looked like her home. As we ate dinner together, I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "How are you?" "Really?" She thought about it for a long moment. "I'm sad. I probably always will be." She took another bite before continuing, "But I'm not broken anymore." That sentence stayed with me. Not broken anymore. Healing isn't about pretending something never happened. It's about learning how to keep living after it does. A few weeks later, my brother invited all of us to his son's 8th birthday party. Walking into that house felt strange in the best possible way. There were balloons everywhere. Kids were running through the backyard. Someone was trying to light the birthday candles while the birthday boy kept sneaking frosting from the cake. It looked like every other children's birthday party, and that's exactly what made it special. While everyone else was distracted, my nephew walked over and tugged on my sleeve. "Aunt Emily, yeah, buddy, I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing. There were stick figures standing together. At the top, written in messy 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family." I looked closer. There was him, his mom, his dad, Ryan, Noah, me, even Grandma. Everyone was there. I smiled. "You drew all of us," he nodded proudly. "Because you're all my family." I had to blink a few times before I could answer. "Thank you, it's perfect." I carefully folded the drawing and slipped it into my purse. I still have it today. Not long after the party, Dad reached out again. This time it wasn't to us. It was to my brother. None of us knew about it until later. According to my brother, Dad asked if they could meet for coffee. For the first time in years, my brother agreed. When I asked him how it went, he shrugged. "It was complicated." "What happened?" He apologized. "Did you believe him?" "I think he was sincere." I waited for him to continue. "But sincerity doesn't erase 30 years. That was probably the most honest answer anyone could have given. Forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. You can accept someone's apology without pretending the past didn't happen. My brother understood that better than anyone. As for me, people sometimes ask if I regret finding out the truth. It's a difficult question. I hate what it did to my mother. I hate that my father spent decades lying to the people who loved him most. I hate that my older brother grew up without the father he deserved. I hate that it took a little boy fighting for his life to bring us together. But if the question is whether I regret knowing my brother, the answer is easy. No, not for a second, because none of this was his fault and my nephew. Every time I watch him laugh, run across a baseball field, or argue with Ryan over which team is better, I'm reminded that even the darkest secrets can sometimes lead to unexpected blessings. Not because the lies were worth it, they never were, but because innocent people refused to let those lies define the rest of their lives. That's the family I choose to hold on to. And that's the family I'll keep choosing, every single day. About 2 years after everything came to light, our family looked completely different than it had before. If you compared an old family photo to a new one, you'd immediately notice the changes. Dad was gone, my older brother was there, his wife was there. And right in the middle of every picture was my nephew, smiling like he'd always belonged with us. In many ways, he had, we just hadn't known it. One Sunday afternoon, Grandma insisted on hosting a family lunch. She had one rule: no talking about lawyers, no talking about the divorce, and absolutely no arguing. Ryan laughed. So, what are we supposed to talk about? Grandma smiled. Food, that sounded like her. By noon, her house smelled like homemade bread, roasted chicken, and apple pie. The dining room was louder than it had been in years. My nephew was telling everyone about his baseball season. Apparently, he was convinced he'd hit the longest home run in Little League history. My brother laughed. It rolled past second base. It did not, my nephew protested. It almost reached the fence. Ryan pretended to think about it. I don't know. I think your dad might be right. My nephew crossed his arms dramatically. You guys are jealous. The entire table burst into laughter. Watching that little boy joke around like every other 8-year-old in America felt like the greatest gift we could have asked for. After lunch, I stepped outside with my brother while everyone else stayed inside helping Grandma clean up. We sat on the porch, each holding a cup of coffee. You know, I said, I've been thinking about something. What's that? If your son hadn't gotten sick, he finished my sentence, we probably never would have met. I nodded. He stared out at the backyard for a long moment. I've thought about that too. Does it ever make you angry? He considered the question carefully. Sometimes, but mostly, he smiled faintly. I'm just grateful he's still here. I looked through the window. My nephew was inside helping Grandma dry dishes, wearing an oversized apron that nearly reached his ankles. She was laughing at something he'd said. For a moment, it looked like they'd known each other forever. Later that evening, Mom joined us on the porch. She'd been doing much better over the past year. She'd made new friends, started volunteering at the local library, even taken a weekend trip with 2 of her closest friends. The sadness hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled her life. She sat beside us and smiled. You know what your grandmother told me yesterday? What? She said families aren't measured by how they're created, they're measured by how they treat each other. My brother looked down at his coffee. I've been really lucky. Mom immediately shook her head. No, we're the lucky ones. He looked surprised. You gave us the chance to know you. She reached over and squeezed his hand. And you gave us the chance to know him. She nodded toward my nephew. I'll always hate how all of this happened, but I'll never regret having another grandson. My brother didn't say anything. He simply smiled and looked away, trying to hide the tears forming in his eyes. Not everyone got a happy ending, though. Dad remained distant from all of us. He occasionally sent birthday cards. Sometimes he'd text on holidays. Ryan almost never replied. Noah answered politely but briefly. I responded every once in a while, but our relationship was nothing like it used to be. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild, especially after decades of deception. As far as I know, he and my brother met one more time after that coffee conversation. It lasted less than an hour. Neither of them ever shared many details. I don't think either one expected miracles. Some relationships simply can't be repaired. And that's a painful truth everyone eventually had to accept. Every now and then someone asks me if I hate my father. The honest answer is, no, hatred takes too much energy. What I feel is sadness. Sadness that one decision made so many years ago created pain for so many innocent people. Sadness that he missed watching his oldest son grow up. Sadness that my mother lost the marriage she believed in. Sadness that my brothers and I had to question memories we once treasured. Most of all, sadness that none of it ever had to happen this way. One honest conversation decades ago could have changed everything. Instead, fear kept the truth buried until a little boy's life depended on uncovering it. If there's one lesson I've taken from all of this, it's that secrets rarely stay buried forever. Sometimes they surface months later, sometimes decades later, but eventually. The truth has a way of finding the light. When it does, you get a choice. you can let that truth destroy everyone around you. Or you can refuse to let someone else's mistakes define the rest of your story. That's the choice my family made, not because it was easy, but because my nephew deserved a future that wasn't shaped by the lies of the past. And every time I watch him step onto a baseball field with a glove on one hand and the biggest smile you've ever seen, I know we made the right choice. It's been almost 3 years since the day our lives changed forever. Sometimes I still catch myself thinking about the woman I was before that phone call. The woman who believed she knew every chapter of her family's story. She had no idea that one chapter had been hidden from her all along. If I could go back and talk to that version of myself, I don't think I'd tell her what was coming. Some truths are so painful that no amount of preparation can make them easier. You simply have to live through them. A few months ago, our entire family gathered again for Thanksgiving. Growing up, Thanksgiving was always my mom's favorite holiday. She loved having everyone together, even if it meant spending 3 days cooking. After the divorce, I honestly didn't think we'd ever celebrate it the same way again. But Grandma refused to let the tradition disappear. She opened her home just like she had every year before. As everyone arrived, I stood by the front door helping greet people. Ryan came first. Then Noah, a few relatives, and then my brother walked in carrying a pumpkin pie. His wife followed behind him. Right between them was my nephew, proudly holding a tray of homemade cookies. He grinned the second he saw me. Aunt Emily, before I could even answer, he wrapped his arms around me. I hugged him back. Hey buddy, I made cookies, so I heard. They're better than Grandma's. Grandma, who had been walking down the hallway, laughed. We'll see about that. The entire house filled with laughter. It was loud, warm, comfortable for the first time in a long time. It actually felt like a family gathering again. Later that evening, after dinner, I stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. A few minutes later, Mom joined me. She handed me a mug of hot chocolate. We stood there quietly watching snow begin to fall. She smiled. You know, I used to think this story only had one ending. What ending? She looked out toward the backyard. The day I found out about your father's secret, I thought my family was over. She paused. I was wrong. I looked back through the kitchen window. Inside, my nephew was trying to convince Ryan that he could eat a third slice of pie. Noah was pretending to referee the argument. Grandma was laughing so hard she had to sit down. My brother was helping clear the table. His wife was talking with a few cousins. It wasn't the family I'd grown up with, but it was still family. Mom noticed me smiling. What are you thinking? I answered honestly. I'm thinking that Dad's biggest secret ended up bringing someone into our lives who should have been here all along. She nodded slowly. I've thought that too. Not long after Thanksgiving, my nephew had another routine checkup. By then, hospital visits had become much less frequent. Most of them were simply to make sure everything was continuing to go well. My brother called us afterward. The first thing we heard was my nephew shouting into the phone. I'm healthy, we all laughed. Then my brother got back on the line. The doctor says he's doing amazing. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 3 years earlier, we weren't sure he'd survive. Now he was complaining about homework and asking for a puppy. Life has a funny way of reminding you what's important. People sometimes ask if we've forgiven Dad. The truth is, every relationship is different. Mom chose to move forward without him. Ryan keeps his distance. Noah speaks to him occasionally. I still answer the phone when he calls once in a while, not because everything is fixed. It isn't. Some things never fully heal, but carrying anger forever doesn't help anyone. My brother still speaks to him from time to time as well, not because they suddenly became father and son. They didn't. Too many years had been lost for that. But they've both accepted that the past can't be rewritten. The best either of them can do is be honest now, even if honesty came decades too late. If you've listened to my story this far, I hope there's one thing you remember. This isn't a story about an affair. It's not even a story about betrayal. It's a story about choices. My father chose secrecy. My mother chose self-respect. My older brother chose courage when he reached out to strangers in the hope of saving his son. A woman with no biological connection to our family chose to become a bone marrow donor and gave a little boy a second chance at life. And the rest of us chose not to let someone else's mistakes keep us from knowing each other. Those choices changed everything. Today, if someone asks me how many siblings I have, I don't hesitate anymore. I smile and answer, I have 3 brothers, because that's the truth. It always was, we just didn't know it yet. And every time I hear my nephew call me Aunt Emily, I'm reminded that even after unimaginable heartbreak, life can still surprise you with something beautiful, not because the pain disappears, but because love has a way of growing in the places where you least expect it.